Blood always tasted like copper and regret. Marcus Kane knew this because he'd been tasting his own for 340 years, ever since a Confederate bayonet carved a 6-inch furrow across his ribs at a place called Gettysburg. The wound never healed properly. Blessed Silver, the priest soldier who wielded it, had whispered before Kane broke his neck. The scar tissue pulled tight across his chest now as he sat in darkness alone with ghosts that refused to stay buried. Seattle sprawled beneath his penthouse windows, a circuit board of light against Puget Sound's black mirror. 2:47 in the morning, the hour when honest people slept and creatures like him remembered why they didn't deserve to. Rain hammered the glass in sheets, turning the city into an impressionist painting, all bleeding edges and uncertain borders. Somewhere down there, a woman was being beaten by her husband. Somewhere else, a man was dying alone in an alley. The world turned on its axis of small cruelties, while Marcus Kane sat in a $12,000 Herman Miller chair, holding a sword older than the country that forged it. The cavalry saber rested across his knees, Union Army issue, 1862, Springfield Armory. His brother Nathaniel had carried it through 3 years of war before a Confederate cannonball tore him apart at Gettysburg, defending a field hospital full of wounded rebels. Marcus had asked him why. Why die for enemy soldiers? Nathaniel's answer came back across a century and a half of accumulated failures. Because they stopped being enemies when they needed help. They became people. 23 hours later, Nathaniel was dead and Marcus was dying, gut shot and bleeding out in a farmhouse while both armies retreated. Then Adrian Cross found him. Young Adrian, barely 70 years, turned still pretending the world made sense. The offer was simple: die human or live as something else. Marcus chose poorly. Or perhaps he chose correctly and spent the next 3 centuries paying for it. The television murmured on mute, some late-night news cycle chewing over scandals too small to matter. Then a face appeared that made every muscle in Marcus's body lock tight. The banner read, "Vanguard Dynamics announces breakthrough in regenerative medicine." The CEO stood at a podium, silver-haired and ramrod-straight medals on his chest catching studio lights. Colonel Vincent Shaw, 62 years old now. But Marcus remembered him at 27, scared and furious in the jungle darkness of Khe Sanh. The memory hit like a mortar round. Vietnam, 1968. Marcus had been playing soldier again, unable to stay away from wars the way some men couldn't stay away from whiskey. He'd attached himself to a Marine unit as a civilian contractor, maintaining equipment and occasionally pulling wounded men out of firefights when the darkness gave him cover. Lieutenant Shaw commanded the security detail that night. The base came under siege. 3 waves of NVA regular sappers in the wire, the world on fire. Marcus had moved through it like smoke, pulling Marines to cover killing with hands and whatever weapons he found. Shaw saw him take 7 rounds and keep moving. Saw him snap a man's spine with one hand. Saw him drag 3 wounded Marines 200 yards while his own blood turned the mud black. The next morning, Shaw tried to have him arrested, demanded blood tests, x-rays, interrogation. Marcus had disappeared into the jungle before the MPs arrived, but Shaw's report went up the chain. It came back stamped with classifications Shaw didn't have clearance to read. The official word: Lieutenant Shaw experienced combat stress hallucinations, recommended for psychiatric evaluation. They cashiered him out 6 months later, ruined his career, his reputation, his life. And now Shaw ran a company worth $800 million with contracts in 40 countries and research facilities that made CDC biosafety labs look like high school chemistry sets. The Chiron scrolled Vanguard Dynamics partners with federal agencies on regenerative medicine breakthrough. CEO Shaw, "We're on the verge of eliminating aging as we know it." Marcus turned the volume up. Shaw's voice filled the penthouse, smooth and confident, the voice of a man who'd rebuilt himself from ashes. For too long, humanity has accepted death as inevitable, disease as natural, suffering as our inheritance. Vanguard Dynamics is changing that paradigm. Our research into cellular regeneration, into the mechanisms that allow certain organisms to heal from catastrophic injury, is yielding results that would have seemed like science fiction a decade ago. A reporter's voice off camera. "What kind of results, Colonel?" "We've identified certain genetic markers, certain blood-borne factors that dramatically accelerate healing, slow aging, even reverse some forms of cellular decay. The applications are endless: cancer treatment, trauma recovery, life extension. We're talking about giving humanity the tools to transcend its biological limitations. Where do these genetic markers come from? Shaw's smile never wavered. That's proprietary information, I'm afraid. But I can tell you we're working with volunteer donor populations who've shown remarkable regenerative properties. With their cooperation and CDC oversight, we're isolating the mechanisms and synthesizing compounds that could benefit millions. The interview continued, but Marcus no longer heard it. Volunteer donor populations, regenerative properties. Shaw had spent 55 years hunting the thing that ruined his life, and now he'd found a way to monetize it. The phone in Marcus's hand buzzed, Adrian's name on the screen. Marcus let it ring 3 times before answering. Adrian's voice carried the particular tension of a king trying to sound casual. Council meeting in 1 hour. Thornwood's pushing the Vanguard proposal again. I need your vote. Marcus watched Shaw's face on the television, that smile that promised salvation while it sharpened knives. I'll be there. Marcus, you've been distant lately. Is everything... I said I'll be there. The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down with surgical care, the kind of precision that kept hands from shaking. Adrian meant well. Adrian always meant well. That was the problem with young kings. 208 years felt like forever to them. They thought they'd seen enough to understand the patterns, the cycles, the way history folded back on itself like origami made of corpses. But Marcus remembered Rome burning, remembered the Black Death, remembered watching smallpox kill 90% of the Cherokee in 3 years, while white men called it God's will. He'd seen humans at their worst and their best, and the distance between the two was thinner than most people wanted to believe. Shaw's interview ended. The anchors moved on to a shooting in Tacoma, 12 dead thoughts and prayers, more at 11. Marcus stood joints protesting after hours of stillness and carried Nathaniel's saber to the wall safe. The blade slid into its case beside other relics, a purple heart from a war. The recipient didn't survive a photograph of a woman whose name time had stolen a silver bullet dug out of Marcus's own heart in 1923. The safe closed with a hydraulic hiss. Some memories deserved to stay locked away. The closet yielded a charcoal suit, Italian silk that cost more than a working man's monthly rent. Marcus had lived long enough to see clothing cycles repeat 3 times over. Everything came back eventually. Fashion, music, fascism. The razor scraped away 2 days of silver stubble. The face in the mirror looked 60, weathered by a life outdoors crow's feet from squinting into too many sunrises. But the eyes were wrong. The eyes were old in a way no human's eyes should be, carrying weight that turned iris gray into tombstone gray. He'd fought in every American war since Bull Run. Gettysburg, the Somme, Belleau Wood, Iwo Jima, San Fallujah. 63 confirmed kills with his sniper rifle in the Pacific Theater, alone back when vampires could still pretend they were serving something larger than themselves. A Navy Cross he couldn't accept because he didn't officially exist. 3 Silver Stars and a Medal of Honor nomination that disappeared into classified archives when military intelligence realized what he was. 273 years of being the thing that goes bump in the night, pretending it was all for a greater good. The suit jacket settled across his shoulders with the weight of costume of pretense. Marcus Kane, elder vampire. Marcus Kane, loyal servant to King Adrian Cross for 80 years. Marcus Kane, the weary soldier who'd fought too long and forgotten what he was fighting for. All the masks felt equally true and equally false. The elevator descended 60 floors in silence. Marcus's reflection stared back at him from polished bronze, a ghost haunting itself. The penthouse belonged to Adrian's court, provided as compensation for service rendered. Everything in Marcus's life belonged to someone else. Even the life itself was borrowed, stolen from a dying man in a Pennsylvania farmhouse by a vampire who thought he was performing mercy. Adrian had been young then, idealistic, believing their kind could be noble if they tried hard enough. Marcus had disabused him of that notion over the following decades, but some lessons Adrian refused to learn. The parking garage smelled of concrete and motor oil. Marcus's motorcycle waited in its designated spot, a Ducati Diavel that could outrun everything except his own memories. The engine's growl echoed off concrete pillars as he threaded through downtown Seattle rain, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. Most of the city slept, but in certain neighborhoods, certain buildings behind certain doors, others like him stirred. Vampires didn't need much sleep. Another curse disguised as blessing. Nocturne occupied a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and reclaimed timber, the kind of place that charged $40 for a cocktail and called it craft. The humans who visited during business hours never noticed the security, the cameras, the fact that the restaurant never seemed to close. They saw atmosphere and exclusivity, paid their bills, posted their photos. They didn't see the reinforced door frames, the UV-resistant window film, the escape routes built into every wall. They didn't notice that the waitstaff never aged, that the same hostess who'd greeted them in 2010 looked identical in 2025. Humans were spectacularly good at not noticing things that disrupted their comfortable narratives. Marcus parked in the alley behind the building. The service entrance recognized his fingerprints and retinal pattern steel, door hissing open on hydraulics that could hold against small arms fire. The corridor beyond stretched toward amber light and the murmur of voices. Classical music drifted from hidden speakers, something baroque and melancholy. Adrian had expensive taste and the budget to indulge it. The council chamber occupied the building's third floor, accessible only through biometric locks and personal invitation. 20 vampires stood in clusters around a conference table that could seat 40. Marcus recognized most of them. Victoria Ashford held court near the windows, her gold dress catching light, dark skin glowing against pale faces. She'd been a prosecutor in New York before the Great Depression, and she still cross-examined the world like a hostile witness. Damien Thornwood lounged against the far wall, blonde and beautiful and utterly empty, behind the eyes surrounded by his usual pack of sycophants. Others Marcus knew by name. Indeed, Catherine Park turned during the Korean War, now running the Seattle tech sector's nocturnal networking. James Chen, no relation to any Chen Marcus, would meet later, controlling Chinatown's protection rackets with velvet-gloved efficiency, the usual players performing their usual parts. Adrian stood at the head of the table, reading from a tablet with the intense focus of someone trying to convince himself the words made sense. He looked 35 Mediterranean features that could pass for Italian or Greek or Lebanese depending on accent and audience. 208 years hadn't weathered him the way time weathered Marcus. Adrian still believed in progress and improvement, in the myth that tomorrow might be better than today. Hope was a young man's game. The king's head lifted as Marcus entered. Something passed between them, brief as a heartbeat, complex as their shared history. 8 decades of loyalty, of service, of watching Adrian make decisions Marcus couldn't support, but couldn't quite oppose. The accumulated weight of being the conscience Adrian didn't want, and the reminder Marcus didn't care to be. Adrian's voice cut through the sidebar conversations. Marcus, good. We're all here. Let's begin. The vampires settled into chairs with varying degrees of grace. Marcus took his usual position at Adrian's right hand, the place of trusted advisor and potential executioner. In older days, the king's right hand literally held the blade that enforced royal will. Some traditions died harder than others. The tablet projected onto the wall screen, displaying corporate logos and financial statements. Vanguard Dynamics, the letterhead read, Strategic Partnership Proposal. You've all reviewed the materials, Adrian began. His fingers drummed against the table's edge, the only tell that he knew this wouldn't go smoothly. Damien has been negotiating with Vanguard Dynamics for 6 months. They're offering us something unprecedented: political protection, hunter non-aggression, access to their federal contracts and influence networks. In exchange, they want our cooperation with certain research initiatives. Victoria's voice carried the particular skepticism of someone who'd cross-examined too many liars. Cooperation meaning what exactly? Blood samples, tissue biopsies, vivisection. Damien pushed off the wall with liquid grace, moving to stand opposite Marcus like they were generals at a treaty signing. Everything Damien did carried theatrical weight, as if the world was his audience and he was determined to give them a show. They want to understand our regenerative properties, our disease resistance, our longevity, all things that could benefit humanity tremendously. Cancer research alone could save millions of lives. And what do they offer beyond vague promises of protection? Catherine Park's accent carried Seoul's rhythms mixed with San Francisco's tech speak. The U.S. government has demonstrated repeatedly they don't honor treaties with non-human populations. Colonel Shaw has given personal assurances. Damien produced his own tablet, swiping through documents. Guaranteed protection under federal bioterrorism prevention statutes. recognition as an endangered species under ESA provisions, which grants us legal standing and protection from hunter operations, access to CDC and NIH facilities for our own medical research, and a $50 million endowment to establish formal vampire-human relations infrastructure. The room erupted into overlapping conversations. Some vampires leaned forward, interested. Others sat back suspicious. Marcus watched Adrian's face, reading the calculation behind careful neutrality. The king wanted this deal. Needed it, perhaps. The hunter families had been growing bolder in recent years, organizing beyond their traditional territories using social media and genetic databases to identify potential vampires. Formal recognition, legal protection, even the appearance of government cooperation would change the strategic landscape entirely. But Marcus had seen Vincent Shaw's face on television an hour earlier. He'd heard the colonel talk about volunteer donor populations and genetic markers. He'd spent 55 years knowing that Shaw blamed vampires for ruining his life and would spend the rest of it seeking revenge. Some wounds never healed, even for humans. This is collaboration with people who've hunted us for centuries. Marcus's voice stopped the crosstalk like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Shaw isn't offering partnership. He's offering terms of surrender with better branding. Damien's smile never wavered. That's your trauma talking, Marcus. Just because Shaw encountered you in Vietnam doesn't mean he saw me take 7 rounds and keep fighting. Saw me move faster than human possible. Saw me drag 3 wounded Marines through 200 yards of active combat zone without breaking stride. He tried to have me court-martialed for being inhuman, and when that failed, they destroyed his career to keep him quiet. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Adrian's knuckles went white against the table's edge. You're saying Shaw has a personal vendetta? Victoria's statement hung in the air like an accusation. I'm saying Vincent Shaw has spent 5 decades building the resources to destroy us, and now he's convinced you to walk into his research lab voluntarily because he's dressed it up as diplomacy. You don't know that. Adrian's voice carried an edge Marcus hadn't heard in years. You're speculating based on a 55-year-old encounter. People change, Marcus. They evolve. Not about the things that define them. Shaw's defining moment was realizing monsters exist and nobody believed him. That doesn't evolve. That metastasizes. Damien moved around the table, positioning himself center stage. Everything about him screamed calculated charm, from the 3-piece suit to the perfect hair to the accent that somehow managed to sound both British and placeless. Let me pose a counter-argument. What if Shaw's defining moment was realizing vampires exist and choosing to work with them rather than against them? What if his company's regenerative medicine research genuinely could save millions of human lives? What if we're so paranoid from centuries of persecution that we can't recognize an olive branch when it's offered? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. Marcus felt the room slipping away, sentiment shifting like sand. Adrian's face carried the expression of someone grateful for the lifeline Damien had just thrown him. The world is changing, Adrian said, quieter now, more persuasive. Genetic testing, facial recognition, social media. Staying hidden is becoming impossible. We need allies in the human power structure. Shaw's offering us that. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks in everything. The question is whether we have the courage to try something new, or whether we stay locked in old patterns until those patterns get us killed. It was a good speech. Adrian had always been good with speeches. Marcus had heard variations of it across 8 decades. The world is changing. We must adapt. The old ways will destroy us. Sometimes Adrian was right. Sometimes change was the only survival strategy. But sometimes change was just a new way to die. I'm calling for a vote. Adrian stood, commanding the room through sheer presence. All those in favor of entering into partnership with Vanguard Dynamics under the terms Damien has negotiated. Hands rose. Marcus counted them with 6 certainty. Damien, Catherine, James. 4 more vampires whose names barely registered. The young ones mostly. The ones who'd been turned after the internet, after surveillance cameras, after privacy became a quaint memory. They understood Adrian's argument viscerally. Hiding forever wasn't a strategy. It was just slow extinction. Opposed, Marcus's hand went up. Victoria's. 2 others, both old enough to remember when governments signed treaties with native populations and then broke them. 4 votes against 9 in favor. The motion carries. Adrian's voice held relief and something else, something that looked like disappointment directed at Marcus. We'll begin initial cooperation next week. Limited blood samples, voluntary participation, full CDC oversight. Damien will coordinate with Shaw's team on protocols. The meeting dissolved into clusters of conversation. Marcus stood suddenly, unable to breathe despite not needing to. 80 years of service, 80 years of watching Adrian's back, and it came down to this. A handshake deal with the man who'd been hunting them since Marcus left him bleeding in a jungle half a century ago. Adrian caught Marcus's arm as he turned to leave. The king's grip carried strength most humans couldn't match, but it felt fragile compared to the distance suddenly yawning between them. Marcus, wait. We need to talk about this. No, the word came out flat final. You made your decision. I made mine. You can't just, I've followed you for 80 years, Adrian, through politics I didn't like, through compromises that tasted like ash. But this, Marcus pulled free. This is collaboration with the enemy, and I won't be part of it. Marcus, you're speaking out of turn. Then court-martial me. I'm done. The silence that followed carried weight enough to crack foundations. Every vampire in the room watched as Marcus Kane, elder of the court, trusted advisor to the king, walked away from 8 decades of loyalty with nothing but a Civil War sword and the certainty that everything was about to go wrong. The corridor stretched empty and accusatory. Marcus's footsteps echoed off reclaimed brick. Somewhere above, rain hammered on the roof with the steady rhythm of incoming artillery. The service exit waited ahead, promise of escape, of freedom from watching another leader make the choices that would get them all killed. Then the front entrance exploded inward. The door didn't open. It blew off its hinges, 1,000 pounds of reinforced steel flying across the restaurant floor like a playing card. 4 men in tactical gear poured through the opening weapons, raised moving with the coordinated precision of a professional military unit. Behind them, a woman stumbled into the light gray pantsuit, torn and bloodied, a briefcase handcuffed to her left wrist. Everything slowed down the way it did in combat, each second stretching into tactical infinity. Marcus's vampire vision processed details human eyes would miss: the woman's CDC badge hanging from a lanyard, the identification reading, Maya Chen Intelligence Division. The tactical team's gear was military issue, but their patches were civilian contractors. No unit designation, no national insignia. The woman's face carried the particular terror of someone who'd been running for miles and knew she couldn't run much further. She made eye contact with Marcus across 30 feet of restaurant floor. Something in her gaze, desperation mixed with calculation, reminded him of Nathaniel's last words. They stopped being enemies when they needed help. They became people. Maya Chen ran straight toward him, not toward Adrian, who radiated power and authority like a spotlight, not toward the other vampires who'd emerged from the council chamber to investigate the noise. Toward Marcus, because he was the only one who looked old. Old meant experienced. Old meant maybe possibly he'd seen enough horror to help with one more. She grabbed his arm with her free hand. Please, you look like you've seen combat. I need a soldier, not a politician. The tactical team leader stepped forward, removing his helmet. Recognition hit Marcus like a shaped charge. James Morrison. Call sign Reaper Delta Force, retired. They'd crossed paths in Fallujah 2007. Marcus had pulled Morrison out of a house full of insurgents after an IED took out half his squad. Morrison had watched Marcus take rounds that should have killed him and never said a word to command. Professional courtesy between killers. Marcus Kane. Morrison's voice carried the particular weariness of a man who hated what he was about to do but would do it anyway. Been a long time. Reaper. Marcus positioned himself between Morrison and the woman without conscious thought, muscle memory from 1,000 firefights taking over. You're working for Shaw now. Contract work, good money. Morrison's weapon stayed low but ready. That woman stole classified material from Vanguard Dynamics. She's coming with us. The restaurant had gone silent. 30 vampires and whatever human staff hadn't fled watched the standoff with the fascinated stillness of predators evaluating prey. Adrian moved forward from the Crowd King's authority, radiating like heat. Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a private establishment. You can't just, sir, with respect, we have federal authorization to retrieve stolen property and apprehend the suspect. Morrison kept his eyes on Marcus, professional enough to recognize the real threat. We don't want trouble, Just hand over the woman and we'll leave. Maya Chen's fingers dug into Marcus's arm hard enough to draw blood. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the deadly quiet room, every vampire heard it. I know what Vanguard Dynamics is really doing. The volunteer donors aren't volunteers. The regenerative research isn't for medicine. It's a weapon. And if they get me, they get the last piece they need to make it work. Marcus felt something slot into place in his chest, a gear engaging after years of grinding uselessly. Shaw wasn't just hunting vampires. He was building something bigger. Something that required Maya Chen and her stolen intelligence, and whatever blood ran through her veins. The whole Vanguard partnership, the whole political dance Adrian had just signed on to, was cover for something darker. How many pursuers? Marcus's voice came out military flat, slipping into operational mode. Maya matched his tone without hesitation. 4 here. Extraction team outside. Maybe 12 total. Skill set, private military, former special forces. Your offense. I know what Vanguard Dynamics is really doing with vampire blood, and I have proof. Adrian's voice carried warning. Marcus, don't. Marcus ignored him. The words came from somewhere deeper than thought, older than logic. Article 12, Covenant of 1347. Any vampire of 300 years or elder may grant emergency sanctuary in matters of immediate mortal danger. He'd studied the old laws when Adrian was still learning to pass for human. He'd been there when some of those laws were written back when vampires still pretended they were civilized. His voice filled the restaurant, formal and absolute. I invoke sanctuary. This woman is under my protection. The silence that followed was total. Even Morrison seemed taken aback. Adrian's face went carefully blank, the expression he wore when mentally rewriting strategies mid-crisis. You can't grant sanctuary without King's approval. Article 12, Covenant of 1347. Any vampire of 300 years or elder may grant emergency sanctuary in matters of immediate mortal danger. Marcus kept his eyes on Morrison. I'm 340 years old. I qualify, and this is immediate danger. Damian Thornwood's voice dripped with theatrical contempt. You're out of line, Kane. You just voted against the Vanguard partnership, and now you're protecting someone who stole from them. You're making us look like liars and thieves. Then maybe we should stop making deals with people who hunt us. Morrison shifted his weight tactical assessment, playing out behind professional calm. Marcus, I respect you, but I've got orders. 20 more operators outside. We can do this easy or hard. You remember Fallujah Reaper 2007? That house on Highway 10? Morrison's jaw tightened. I remember. You remember who pulled you out when that IED went off? Who carried you 2 miles to the extraction point with shrapnel in my spine? The tactical team exchanged glances. Morrison's hand dropped away from his weapon's trigger guard. I remember. Then I'm calling in that marker. Give me 48 hours. Walk away. Morrison studied Marcus for what felt like an hour compressed into 10 seconds. Whatever he saw in the old vampire's face made something shift in his expression. Not fear exactly, recognition maybe, the acknowledgement that some debts transcended contracts and paychecks. 48 hours. That's all I can buy you before Shaw sends a full kill team. Morrison signaled his team. They withdrew with the same precision they'd entered, weapons covering retreat angles, movement, coordinated by years of practice. The ruined door hung at an angle like a broken tooth. Rain blew in from the street, turning the restaurant floor into a shallow pool. Maya Chen sagged against Marcus' adrenaline crash, hitting hard. Thank you. Thank you. Adrian approached with the careful control of a king whose authority had just been challenged in front of his entire court. His voice came out quiet, which made it more dangerous. Do you have any idea what you just did? Saved a woman's life. She's CDC intelligence. She stole from our new partners. You just put us in the middle of a federal investigation and a corporate war. Good. Maybe it'll remind us we're warriors instead of accountants. The restaurant held its breath. Alpha males squaring off the eternal dance of dominance and resistance. Adrian's eyes flickered with something that might have been hurt under the anger. You're confined to quarters pending council review. Don't make this worse. Too late for that. Marcus turned toward the service exit, Maya Chen still clutching his arm like a life preserver. The other vampires parted like water, none willing to interfere in what was clearly a king's problem. Only Victoria met Marcus's eyes as he passed. Something in her expression looked like approval, or maybe just grim recognition that the old soldier had finally found a hill worth dying on. The corridor, the elevator, the parking garage all blurred together. Rain hammered the city with renewed fury. Maya Chen climbed onto the Ducati behind Marcus without being asked, arms wrapping around his waist, with the desperate strength of someone who'd accepted her life was now in someone else's hands. The motorcycle screamed into the night, rain stinging like bullets, the city, a maze of reflected light and shadow. Marcus drove on autopiloted instinct, navigating toward the industrial district where he maintained a safe house Adrian didn't know about. 3 centuries of life taught you to always have an exit strategy, always keep resources your superiors couldn't access, always maintain the ability to go to ground when everything went sideways. The safe house occupied the top floor of an abandoned cannery near the waterfront. Marcus had purchased it in 1973 under a shell corporation, spent 40 years building it into something that could withstand siege. Reinforced walls, redundant power weapons, cache escape routes through the sewers, all the paranoia of a soldier who'd survived by assuming the worst. Maya Chen stumbled inside, soaked through, shaking with cold and shock. Marcus locked the door, engaged the deadbolts, activated the security perimeter. Outside, rain continued its assault. Inside, silence pressed down like water at depth. The woman stood in the center of the room, briefcase still handcuffed to her wrist, looking around with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose world had just revealed itself to be far stranger than expected. "You're a vampire?" Not a question. "Yes." "The restaurant, those people, all of them?" "Yes." "And you just, what declared me under your protection?" "That's a thing you can do." "It's a thing I did, whether I can remains to be seen." Marcus crossed to the kitchenette, pulled out a bottle of bourbon, older than most countries, poured 2 glasses, handed one to Maya. She stared at it. "You drink alcohol, still works on us. Doesn't last long, but it works." She downed the bourbon in one swallow, coughed, held out the glass for more. Marcus obliged. This time she sipped it, color returning to her face. "I'm Maya Chen, CDC Intelligence Division. Or I was until approximately 6 hours ago, when I stole classified material, assaulted a security guard, and fled a federal facility." Marcus Kane, vampire, Union Army, currently unemployed. Something that might have been a laugh hiccuped out of her. "Unemployed. Just quit my job. 80 years of service ended about 10 minutes before you crashed through that door." She sat down hard in a chair that had seen better decades. The briefcase landed on the floor between them with a solid thunk. "I need to explain what I found, what they're planning. Start from the beginning." So she did. The words tumbled out in fragments: professional competence, fighting exhaustion. Maya Chen, 28, Yale, law epidemiology minor, recruited by CDC's Intelligence Division in 2019 to track biosecurity threats. 3 months ago, anomalous blood samples flagged in the federal database. Anonymous donor program run by Vanguard Dynamics. Blood showing regenerative properties that shouldn't be possible. Disease resistance. Slowed aging markers. And every donor disappeared after 3 to 6 donations. She traced recruitment patterns, targeted genealogies, specific ethnic markers, areas with high vampire population density. Seattle, New Orleans, Boston, all the places vampires clustered when they thought they were being careful. She'd cross-referenced it with declassified military documents, found Vincent Shaw's name attached to a Vietnam-era program codenamed Hostile Unknown Biologics, found photographs of Shaw at Khe Sanh, found the report he'd filed, found the psychiatric evaluation that ended his military career. The briefcase lock clicked open under her bleeding fingers. Documents spilled across the floor. Marcus picked them up with growing dread. Internal memo, Vanguard Dynamics letterhead. Subject, Old Blood Harvest Protocol. Details of a plan to identify humans carrying ancient vampire lineage. Humans whose ancestors had mixed with vampire bloodlines centuries ago. 47 names on a list. 39 marked with red X's. Deceased. 8 remaining, including Maya Chen. Test results showing what happened when old blood mixed with vampire blood. Neutralization of healing factors. Potential weaponization. A compound that could prevent vampire regeneration, turn immortals mortal, kill them as easily as humans died. Recruitment documentation showing Vanguard had been tracking old blood families for 20 years. Funding for the operation traced to shell corporations that ultimately led back to something called Thornwood Enterprises. Marcus looked up from the paper's pieces, falling into place like a tactical assessment coming together. Damian Thornwood, he's been funding Shaw. The partnership vote your king just approved, that's not research cooperation. That's Shaw getting official permission to access vampire DNA to compare it with old blood to perfect his weapon. Maya's hands shook. My blood is the last piece he needs. My family line goes back to 1200s England, to mediators who negotiated peace between vampire covens and human settlements. Our blood carries markers from both sides. If Shaw gets it, if he can synthesize it, every vampire on Earth becomes vulnerable. Marcus set the documents down with careful precision. No more healing, no more immortality, just flesh and blood that dies when you hurt it enough. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane knowing the worst was coming and helpless to stop it. Maya Chen stared at her hands at the briefcase that contained the death of an entire species, at the vampire who'd chosen to protect her for reasons she probably didn't understand. Why did you help me? Her voice came out small. You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Marcus thought about Nathaniel bleeding out at Gettysburg, while Confederate and Union wounded screamed for mercy in a field hospital he died defending. Thought about every war he'd fought, every cause he'd served, every time he'd told himself the violence mattered because it protected something worth protecting. I'm 340 years old. I fought at Gettysburg, the Somme Iwo Jima, Quezon Fallujah. I've killed more men than you've met in your life. I've watched empires rise and fall, and rise again wearing new flags, but carrying old hatreds. He met her eyes, saw her really seeing him for the first time. Not the soldier, not the vampire, but the exhausted thing underneath that kept going, 'cause stopping meant admitting it was all for nothing. And I'm tired of watching the worst people win because good men stayed neutral. You asked for help when you were being hunted. That's the only reason I need. Her eyes went bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. Professional composure cracking just enough to show the terrified analyst underneath the woman who'd stolen classified documents because it was right and now faced the consequences. Shaw will come for me. Your people will revoke your sanctuary. I'm dead either way. Maybe, or maybe we've got 48 hours to prove your conspiracy theory and expose what Shaw's really planning. 48 hours against a military contractor with federal backing and a vampire clan leader who wants me dead. I've faced worse odds. When Gettysburg, Quezon, last Tuesday when I tried to assemble IKEA furniture. The joke startled a laugh out of her, sharp and slightly hysterical. Outside, dawn approached with the inexorable patience of things that couldn't be stopped. Marcus felt it in his bones, the sun's weight pressing down even through clouds and rain. Time to rest, time to plan, time to figure out how to keep a promise he had no idea how to honor. Get some sleep. There's a bed in the back room. Door locks from inside. What about you? I'll keep watch. Old soldier habits. She gathered the documents back into the briefcase, moved toward the back room, then stopped. Marcus, thank you for choosing principle over convenience. The door closed behind her. Marcus stood alone in the pre-dawn gray, holding a glass of bourbon in a century of regrets. His phone buzzed. Adrian's name. Marcus let it go to voicemail. The message that followed was short and cold. Emergency Council Meeting 0600. Your presence is required. Don't make me send people to collect you. So it begins. Marcus looked at the documents Maya had stolen, at the proof of Shaw's weapon, and Thornwood's betrayal, and Adrian's blind stumble into genocide. 48 hours to change the king's mind. 48 hours to expose a conspiracy decades in the making. 48 hours to prove sanctuary meant something more than political convenience. He'd faced worse odds. Maybe. The bourbon went down, smooth, familiar burn that faded too quickly. Marcus Kane, 340 years old, Union Army veteran. Vampire elder, unemployed and insubordinate and possibly insane. All those masks and none of them false. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Dawn broke gray and cold over Puget Sound. Somewhere in the city, Vincent Shaw was planning his next move. Somewhere else, Adrian Cross was deciding how to punish disloyalty. And in a safe house that smelled of salt water and old regrets, Maya Chen slept the sleep of the exhausted, while Marcus Kane kept watch like he'd done for 3 centuries. Some habits were harder to break than others. The phone buzzed again. Morrison's number this time. Marcus answered. "You've got incoming. Shaw's moving faster than I thought. Full tactical team ETA 2 hours to your safe house location." How did he GPS tracker in the woman's briefcase? I didn't know until after we left. Shaw's orders. "You're warning me, that'll cost you." Maybe I'm tired of working for people who play dirty. Morrison's voice carried the weight of someone making a decision in real time. Or maybe I just don't like seeing good soldiers hung out to dry by politicians. Either way, you've got 2 hours. Use them. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the briefcase, at the innocent-looking leather case that was currently broadcasting their location to every hostile force in the region. He could dump it, but the documents inside were the only proof of Shaw's plans. Could run, but running just delayed the inevitable. Could stay and fight, but defending a fixed position against superior numbers was how you got killed. He chose a fourth option. The documents went into a fireproof safe that had survived 3 different wars. The briefcase went into Maya's hands when he woke her 15 minutes later. "Shaw tracked us. We're moving." She came awake instantly, the hyper-alertness of someone who'd been running too long. "We're into the lion's den. If Adrian wants to see me, I'll show up. With you, with the evidence, and with a proposal he can't refuse." "What proposal?" "That we stop playing defense and take the fight to Shaw before he takes it to us." The motorcycle screamed back through Seattle's morning traffic, weaving between cars full of commuters heading to jobs they hated, paying mortgages on houses they didn't own, living small lives in a world that was about to get much stranger. Maya Chen held on tight, the briefcase secured between them, dawn light making her squint. Nocturne looked different in daylight. The magic of amber lighting and carefully curated atmosphere disappeared under gray Pacific Northwest morning. It looked like what it was, an old warehouse pretending to be something more important. The front entrance had been repaired, new door already installed, as if last night's violence had never happened. Marcus walked through it with Maya at his side, past the hostess who recognized him and said nothing, through the empty restaurant to the service elevator. 6 floors down instead of 3 this time. The real council chamber, the one humans never saw. Stone walls carved from bedrock air that tasted of earth and age. This was where vampire business got conducted when pretense wasn't required. 40 vampires filled the chamber. Not the usual 20, but representatives from every clan on the West Coast, every faction with interest in Seattle's politics. Word had spread fast. Marcus Kane had invoked sanctuary, challenged the king's authority, brought a human into their midst who carried proof of genocide. This wasn't a normal council meeting. This was a trial. Adrian stood at the head of the chamber, face carved from marble and patience. Victoria Ashford held position to his left, neutral ground. Damian Thornwood lounged against the right wall with barely contained satisfaction. He'd waited decades for Marcus to slip up badly enough to justify removal. Today was Christmas. Marcus walked straight to the center of the chamber, Maya half a step behind. The assembled vampires watched with the particular stillness of predators, deciding whether something was prey or competition. Some faces Marcus recognized. Others were strangers. Young things turned after the internet, after smartphones, after the world became a surveillance state where hiding meant constantly running. Adrian's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "Marcus Kane, you invoked sanctuary without authorization. You interfered in a federal investigation. You brought a human fugitive into our midst and jeopardized a treaty that took 6 months to negotiate." Each word fell with judicial precision, building a case for punishment. Under normal circumstances, this would warrant immediate expulsion from the court and revocation of all privileges. But given your service record, I'm offering you a chance to explain. Convince us this woman is worth the chaos you've created. Marcus felt Maya tense beside him. This was her moment, her chance to make the case for why her life mattered more than politics. But she was an intelligence analyst, not a lawyer. She dealt in facts, not rhetoric. And vampires were rarely convinced by facts alone. So Marcus spoke first. "You all saw Vincent Shaw on television, heard him talk about regenerative medicine, about volunteer donors, about eliminating aging and disease. It sounded noble, progressive. Exactly what you'd expect from a man trying to move past a traumatic encounter with the unknown. He pulled the documents from Maya's briefcase, held them up. These are internal Vanguard memos, recruitment lists, test results, financial records. They tell a different story. Shaw hasn't moved past anything. He's spent 55 years building toward this, and we just voted to help him. Damien's voice dripped theatrical skepticism. How convenient that you just happen to have documents proving your conspiracy theory right when you're facing consequences for insubordination. The documents are real, verified by CDC databases, cross-referenced with federal archives. Maya's voice shook but held. I'm Dr. Maya Chen, CDC Intelligence Division. My job is tracking biosecurity threats. 3 months ago, I started tracking Vanguard dynamics because their donor recruitment patterns match terrorist cell development protocols. What I found was worse than bioterrorism. It was genocide with a corporate logo. She pulled out the first document, projected it onto the chamber's stone wall via a portable display she'd somehow kept functioning through everything. 47 humans identified as carrying old blood markers, 39 dead, 8 remaining. Every death attributed to natural causes or accidents, but all within 6 months of their last blood donation to Vanguard. Shaw's not researching regenerative medicine. He's testing a vampire kill weapon using old blood as the catalyst. The chamber erupted. Vampires surged forward with voices overlapping in anger and disbelief and fear. Adrian raised his hand for silence, but the gesture took longer than usual to work. This wasn't political theater. This was existential threat made manifest. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos, prosecutor's instincts taking over. Let's say we believe the documents are authentic. What's old blood? Why does it matter? Maya looked at Marcus, uncertain how much to reveal. He nodded. In for a penny, in for a pound. In medieval Europe, certain human families mediated peace between vampire covens and human settlements. Over generations, interbreeding occurred. Not enough to create hybrids, but enough to leave genetic markers. Old blood families carry trace vampire DNA. Catherine Park leaned forward. And this matters why? Because old blood mixed with vampire blood neutralizes healing factors. It's the one substance that can make us mortal. The silence that followed could have crushed Diamond. Every vampire in the chamber understood instantly. Their greatest strength, their immortality, the thing that made them apex predators. It could be taken away. They could become as fragile as the humans they fed on, as vulnerable as the prey they'd spent centuries hunting. Damien recovered first, pivoting to his backup strategy. Even if this is true, handing the Chen woman to Vanguard might be the safest option. Shaw gets what he wants. We get our treaty, and we monitor the research to ensure it's not weaponized. You can't be serious. Victoria's face showed shock that looked genuine. You're proposing we gift-wrap genocide for a man who's been hunting us since Vietnam? I'm proposing pragmatism. Shaw's already tracked us here. He knows where we sleep, where we feed, where we gather. The only thing preventing him from deploying his weapon is complete synthesis. If we give him Maya Chen voluntarily with conditions, we maintain some control. Marcus felt something slot into place, pieces of a conspiracy coming together. You already knew about the weapon, about the old blood families. Damien's smile never wavered. Shaw and I have been partners for 20 years, ever since I realized Adrian's soft policies would destroy us. Vampires need to be apex, not hidden. Shaw's weapon eliminates weak bloodlines, old blood carriers who could be turned against us. Survival of the fittest. The revelation hung in the air like nerve gas. Damien Thornwood, ancient vampire clan leader Adrian's rival, had been working with a human hunter to develop a vampire genocide weapon. The logic was insane and perfectly clear. Eliminate the vulnerable bloodlines. Keep only the strong, emerge from hiding as the dominant species once humanity had been culled of anyone who could threaten them. Adrian's face went white. You've been working with Shaw, the partnership proposal, the 6 months of negotiations. You've been playing us. I've been preparing us for the future. A future where we stop cowering in shadows and take our rightful place as humanity's apex predators. Damien stepped forward, all pretense of civility dropped. Your way leads to extinction, Adrian. Slow erosion as humans develop better surveillance, better weapons, better ways to identify and eliminate us. My way ensures we strike first. The chamber split instantly. Half the vampires moved toward Damien, expressions calculating, weighing his argument. The other half pressed closer to Adrian, loyalty or fear keeping them anchored. Victoria stood alone in the middle, prosecutor's mind, working through the implications. Maya grabbed Marcus's arm. We need to leave, now, before this turns into a war. But Marcus wasn't watching Damien or Adrian. He was watching the chamber's entrance, where 4 vampires in tactical gear had just appeared. Not Damien's people, not Adrian's. Outside contractors judging by their weapons and the way they moved. Professional soldiers wearing vampire faces. The team leader stepped forward, removing his helmet. Marcus didn't recognize him, but the insignia on his vest was clear. Vanguard Dynamics. Nobody moves. By order of Colonel Vincent Shaw and authorization of the Federal Biosecurity Council, this facility is being secured. All occupants are to remain calm and await processing. Adrian's voice carried absolute authority. You have no jurisdiction here. This is sovereign vampire territory under the Covenant of 1347. The Covenant isn't recognized by federal law. You're operating an illegal biological research facility. Everyone here is under quarantine pending CDC investigation. Morrison's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece, the one he'd forgotten he was wearing. It's a raid. Shaw used the CDC investigation as cover. FBI's outside Homeland Security, the whole apparatus. He's not arresting you. He's rounding you up for testing. The tactical team moved forward. Adrian's vampires prepared to fight. Damien's faction held back, waiting to see which way the power shifted. And Marcus Kane, 340 years old, stood in the center of it all, with a woman whose blood could end his species and a choice that would define what his 3 centuries of life had meant. He could fight, take out the tactical team, start a war with humanity that vampires would ultimately lose. Could surrender, trust the system to sort it out, ignore every lesson history had taught about how governments treated populations they feared. Could run, take Maya and disappear. Let others face the consequences of his sanctuary and vocation. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. Colonel Shaw, Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. I know you're listening, monitoring the feeds. You've wanted me dead since Khe-Sanh. I'm offering you a deal. The tactical team hesitated, fingers moving to earpieces as Shaw's orders came through. Marcus pressed his advantage. I'll turn myself in, voluntarily. Complete cooperation with whatever tests you want to run, whatever research protocols you've developed. In exchange, you leave this court alone. No raids, no arrests, no quarantine. Just me. Maya's grip tightened on his arm. No, that's not... And Maya Chen, we both cooperate. You get your old blood research. You get your vampire test subject. You get everything you need to complete Project Daybreak. Adrian's voice carried disbelief. Marcus, what are you doing? Buying time. 48 hours until Shaw completes his weapon. But he needs us alive for testing, which means 48 hours where we're not dead. The tactical team leader touched his earpiece, nodded. Colonel Shaw accepts your terms. You and Dr. Chen will accompany us to a secure research facility. Cooperation is expected. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Understood. Marcus turned to Maya, lowered his voice so only she could hear. Trust me, I've been a prisoner before. I know how to escape. Her eyes searched his face for certainty he didn't feel. Whatever she saw there made her nod. Okay, but if you get me killed, I'm haunting you for the next 300 years. Fair. The tactical team secured them with plastic restraints, the kind that wouldn't hold a vampire for more than a few seconds, but provided theater for the other agencies watching from above. Marcus let them playing the role of cooperative prisoner. Maya did the same, intelligence analyst's mind, probably already cataloging everything for later use. As they were led toward the chamber's exit, Marcus caught Adrian's eyes. The king's face showed a complex mix of emotions, betrayal, concern, calculation, something that might have been respect under all the political considerations. 72 hours. Adrian's voice barely carried across the chamber. After that, sanctuary is revoked and you're on your own. 72 hours. Marcus acknowledged. More than he'd expected, less than he needed. Damien stepped forward, theatrical to the end. I formally challenge Marcus Kane's right to grant sanctuary. Trial by combat traditional terms, 72 hours from now. The words hit like a shaped charge. Challenging an elder was serious business, rarely done, never done lightly. But Damien was old enough to qualify, and the challenge was legal under covenant law. If Marcus survived Shaw's testing, if he made it back to Seattle, if he somehow managed to prove the conspiracy, he'd still have to fight Damien Thornwood to the death. Adrian looked sick. Damien, that's. My right under covenant law. Kane is 340 years old. I'm 385. We're peers. I claim challenge. The tactical team didn't care about vampire politics. They marched Marcus and Maya through corridors that suddenly felt like execution chambers, up elevators that climbed toward daylight and federal custody and whatever Shaw had planned for them. Morrison was waiting by the FBI vehicle, still wearing his contractor gear, face carefully neutral. As Marcus passed, he leaned in close enough to whisper, "Shaw's facility is 40 miles north. Former Army Research Station classified location. He's expecting you. I'll be nearby." "Reaper, you're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe, but I remember Fallujah. I remember you could have left me, but didn't. Figure I owe you at least one bad decision." The vehicles pulled away from Nocturne with the slow certainty of government operations, sirens, silent lights off, nothing to alert the morning commuters to the fact that Seattle's vampire population had just been exposed and contained in a single operation. Shaw had planned this for decades. Every contingency covered, every variable accounted for, every threat neutralized. Except he didn't understand Marcus Kane. Didn't know that 340 years of life had taught lessons that couldn't be planned around. Survival wasn't about strength or speed or even immortality. It was about being willing to die for something that mattered more than continued existence. Maya leaned against him in the vehicle's back seat, exhausted beyond words. Her voice came out barely audible over the engine noise. "We're going to die, aren't we?" "Maybe, but we'll make Shaw work for it." "That's not reassuring." "I know." The highway stretched north through evergreen forests and morning mist. Somewhere ahead, Vincent Shaw waited with 55 years of hatred and the technology to finally end what started in a jungle half a world away. Behind them, Adrian Cross faced the reality that his trusted elder had been right about the partnership being a trap. And in some secure location, Damien Thornwood prepared for a challenge that would determine not just sanctuary law, but the future of vampire-human relations for generations. Marcus closed his eyes, felt the sun's weight pressing through the vehicle's windows, even through clouds. He'd been dying for 340 years, ever since Nathaniel's sword became his burden, and Adrian's offer became his curse. Maybe it was time to stop dying and start living long enough to make one last thing right. The facility appeared through the trees like something out of a paranoid fantasy. Chain-link fences, topped with razor-wire guard towers with automated weapons. The whole complex designed to keep things in, not out. Black Ops heaven. Vampire prison. The vehicles stopped at the main gate. Guards checked credentials with military precision. Maya's hand found Marcus's squeezed once. "No matter what happens, thank you for choosing principle over survival." "You're welcome, though you should probably reserve judgment until we see if the principle gets us killed." The gates opened. The vehicles rolled forward into compound. Vincent Shaw stood waiting on the main building steps, silver-haired and straight-backed, looking exactly like what he was, a man who'd spent his entire life preparing for this moment. His smile never reached his eyes as Marcus was led toward him. "Kane, 55 years. I knew you couldn't die at Quezon. Nothing kills you, does it? Everything kills, eventually, Vincent. You're just the latest in a long line trying." "Oh, I'm not going to usher you." Shaw's smile widened. "I'm going to study you, learn everything about what makes you different, and then I'm going to use that knowledge to eliminate your entire species." "That's genocide. That's pest control. Your kind are parasites, predators, and the Chen woman's blood is going to give me the tool to exterminate you all." The doors closed behind them with the finality of coffin lids. Marcus caught one last glimpse of sunrise through reinforced windows before they descended into the facility's depths. Maya walked beside him, briefcase now confiscated, secrets extracted, everything she'd stolen now in Shaw's hands. They'd walked into the lion's den voluntarily, given Shaw everything he wanted, put themselves at the mercy of a man who'd spent decades planning vampire extinction. It was possibly the stupidest thing Marcus had done in 340 years, or possibly the smartest. Time would tell. It always did. Shaw's facility smelled like every black site Marcus had ever infiltrated. Antiseptic, covering blood, fluorescent lights, humming frequencies designed to induce anxiety, the particular staleness of air, recycled through HEPA filters, paranoid enough to catch vampire pheromones. They'd been separated immediately. Maya disappeared down a corridor marked Biosafety Level 4, her protest cut off by pneumatic doors that sealed with the finality of a tomb. Marcus went the other direction through security checkpoints, where guards carried weapons loaded with wooden rounds and silver-tipped ammunition downstairs that descended far deeper than any legitimate research facility required. The cell was almost comfortable. Reinforced concrete on 5 sides, one wall of UV-resistant glass, allowing observation from the control room beyond. Military cot, stainless steel toilet, nothing that could be weaponized by someone with vampire strength. They'd done their homework. Shaw had spent 5 decades planning this moment, and it showed in every detail. The interrogation started at dawn. Shaw entered the observation room flanked by technicians in biohazard suits, a scientist Marcus didn't recognize, and Morrison standing guard with the expression of someone deeply uncomfortable with his current employment. The colonel wore a suit instead of tactical gear. Civilized predator conducting civilized research. Shaw's voice came through speakers built into the ceiling. "You're probably wondering why I haven't killed you yet." Marcus sat on the cot, affecting boredom he didn't feel. "You need baseline data. Can't weaponize vampire biology without understanding normal parameters first." "Smart, but incomplete. I need to understand how old blood interacts with vampire physiology. Chen's blood mixed with yours creates the neutralization effect, but the mechanism is unclear. Does it attack cellular regeneration directly? Disrupt the viral component that creates vampirism? Block the neurological pathways that enable your abilities? Viral component, Marcus let curiosity show. Information gathering went both ways. Shaw smiled, recognizing the game. "You didn't know vampirism is a virus, highly sophisticated, probably engineered rather than naturally occurring. It rewrites cellular DNA, hijacks regenerative processes, alters neurochemistry to enable compulsion and enhance perception. We've known this since the 80s when genetic sequencing became advanced enough to identify the markers." The revelation sat heavy in Marcus's chest. 340 years walking around with a virus in his blood, something that had rewritten what it meant to be Marcus Kane. Adrian had called it a gift, a curse, a transformation. But it was infection, sophisticated infection, but infection nonetheless. And old blood carries antibodies. Your species' own immune response passed down through human populations that interbred with vampires before the genetic drift became incompatible. Chen's ancestors mediated peace because their blood made them resistant to turning resistant to compulsion. They were natural antibodies walking around in human bodies. "So you're making a vaccine?" "I'm making a cure." Shaw's eyes held zealot certainty, the particular madness of someone who believed their atrocity served a greater good. "Your kind are predators. You feed on humans, manipulate us, treat us like cattle. The virus that creates you is a plague on humanity, and I'm developing the cure that will eliminate it forever." The technicians began their work. Blood draws, tissue samples, scans that mapped Marcus's cellular structure in 3 dimensions. He let them play cooperative prisoner while his mind worked tactical problems. The facility was underground, reinforced, designed specifically to contain vampires. But it was still a human facility operated by humans dependent on human systems. Everything human had vulnerabilities if you knew where to look. Maya appeared in an adjacent cell visible through another observation window. She looked exhausted but unharmed, dressed in paper scrubs, a fur line running into her arm. They were extracting blood, measuring whatever made old blood special. Her eyes found Marcus through the glass, terror and determination warring in her expression. Shaw noticed the direction of Marcus's attention. "She's cooperating beautifully, very professional. Keeps asking about data security protocols and sample handling procedures. Analyst to the core. If you hurt her..." "I won't. Her blood is too valuable. But Kane, understand this, by tomorrow night I'll have synthesized enough of the neutralization compound to begin field testing. And by the end of the week I'll have enough to deploy globally. Every vampire in every city will be vulnerable. Your immortality ends not with a bang, but with a chemical formula administered via aerosol dispersion. Adrian will stop you. The Covenant will. Adrian signed a partnership agreement giving Vanguard access to vampire DNA for research purposes. He'll protest certainly, file legal challenges, but by the time any court hears the case, it'll be over. You'll all be human again, aging normally, dying from wounds that used to heal. Shaw leaned closer to the microphone. And then the hunters finish what we started. The testing continued through the day. Hours of blood draws and biopsies and scans that left Marcus feeling hollowed out in ways that had nothing to do with physical extraction. By sunset, when Shaw's people finally left him alone, Marcus had counted 17 cameras, 9 armed guards, 5 access points, and 0 obvious escape routes. Morrison had disappeared after the first hour, either dismissed or avoiding complicity in whatever happened next. The lights dimmed to simulate night, some concession to circadian rhythms. Maya slept fitfully in her cell, curled on the cot like a child. Marcus watched her through the glass and thought about Nathaniel, about every person he'd failed to protect across 3 centuries of trying. The door's magnetic lock disengaged with a click that shouldn't have happened. Marcus was on his feet instantly, every combat instinct screaming trap even as opportunity presented itself. Morrison slipped through the opening, moving with Delta Force efficiency, night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. 30 seconds. There's a maintenance tunnel 2 levels up, exits near the north perimeter. I can get you that far. Why? Because Shaw's not planning cure research. He's planning genocide. And I didn't sign up to be history's next great war criminal. Morrison tossed Marcus a key card. Chen's cell is 2 doors down. Tunnel access is marked Service Corridor C. After that, you're on your own. Reaper, go before I change my mind, or Shaw figures out I disabled the cameras. Marcus went. The key card opened Maya's cell. She woke instantly, analyst's mind processing escape before her body fully engaged. They moved through corridors that suddenly felt less like fortress and more like maze, following Morrison's directions toward the maintenance access. Guards patrolled on predictable schedules, cameras covered predictable angles. Shaw had built this facility to contain vampires, not to prevent escape by someone who'd spent 3 centuries learning how institutions failed. The tunnel was exactly where Morrison promised, behind a service door ladder descending into darkness that Marcus's vision penetrated easily. Maya climbed down, first Marcus following, pulling the access hatch closed above them. The tunnel stretched in one direction, utility pipes and electrical conduits running its length barely high enough for crouching movement. They ran hunched over for what felt like miles, but was probably only hundreds of yards. Maya's breathing came harsh in the confined space, civilian conditioning, pushed past comfortable limits. Marcus could have carried her, but the tunnel's dimensions didn't allow it. So they ran together, hunter and prey united by circumstance, until the tunnel ended at another ladder leading up. The exit opened into evergreen forest dawn, approaching with gray inevitability. The facility sat half a mile back, lights and razor wire visible through the trees. No alarms yet. Morrison had bought them maybe an hour before Shaw realized his prized specimens had vanished. Maya collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping. Where do we go? Shaw knows every vampire safe house in Seattle. Adrian's court is compromised. We can't. Industrial district, place I've maintained since the 70s. Off books, off radar. You've had a secret safe house for 50 years and never told anyone. Paranoia keeps you alive longer than loyalty. They moved through forest until they hit a rural highway. Marcus flagged down a delivery truck, compelled the driver with eye contact, and a carefully modulated voice convinced the man he was providing civic assistance by giving 2 stranded hikers a ride into Seattle. Compulsion worked best on tired humans. Minimal resistance, the mental equivalent of picking a cheap lock. The safe house looked exactly as Marcus had left it, industrial building, exterior, hiding reinforced interior, enough supplies to survive a siege weapons cache that would make a gun show organizer weep with joy. Morrison waited inside, having beaten them there by 30 minutes, surrounded by electronics that definitely weren't part of the original 1970s construction. The operator looked up as they entered, something like relief crossing his scarred face. Shaw's mobilizing. Full tactical teams, federal cooperation, the whole apparatus. You've got maybe 12 hours before they lock down Seattle completely. Then we use those 12 hours. Marcus moved to the table where Morrison had spread tactical displays. satellite imagery facility, schematics, personnel rosters, everything needed for operational planning. Brief me. Morrison's assessment came with professional precision. Vanguard Dynamics employed 2,400 personnel globally, 800 million in annual revenue federal contracts in 40 countries. Shaw commanded resources that dwarfed most small nations. Hunter-Killer Team 7 specialized in vampire elimination, 12 operators trained specifically to counter supernatural targets. Current deployment estimate 20 operators in saddle, another 40 available within 6 hours. Shaw won't risk open warfare. Too much exposure, too many witnesses. He'll use the federal partnership as cover stage, it as legitimate law enforcement activity. Maya pulled up financial records on her laptop, fingers flying across keys. I've been tracking Thornwood Enterprises for months. The money trail leads to shell corporations in the Caymans, Luxembourg, Singapore. But underneath all the layers, there's a pattern. Vanguard gets funding spikes every time vampire populations spike in major cities. Like someone's been paying Shaw to develop his weapon for decades. Damien. Marcus studied the financial data, seeing the conspiracy's full scope for the first time. He's not just Shaw's ally. He's been Shaw's patron since the beginning, funding the research, providing intelligence, steering Shaw toward old blood families. Morrison brought up surveillance footage from Nocturne timestamped 3 hours earlier. Victoria Ashford leaving the building, making a phone call, speaking to someone off camera. The audio quality was poor, but lip readers could probably reconstruct the conversation. Victoria's reporting to someone, could be Damien, could be Shaw, could be playing both sides for her own agenda. Or she's gathering intelligence to protect the court. Maya's legal training showed in her instinct toward benefit of doubt. Victoria was a prosecutor. She investigates before accusing. Or she's the mole who's been feeding Shaw information for years. The tactical problem spread before them like a three-dimensional chess game. Shaw had resources, federal backing, the law on his side. Damien controlled a vampire faction willing to commit genocide for political advantage. Adrian's court was compromised, possibly by Victoria, definitely by vampires who saw Damien's logic as survival pragmatism. And Marcus had 48 hours minus travel time to prove a conspiracy, expose the traitors, and prevent the deployment of a weapon that would make his entire species mortal. We need a fence. Morrison's finger traced lines on the tactical map. Waiting here makes us targets. We hit Shaw's Seattle facility, gather hard evidence, force him to expose his real agenda. That's a fortress. Maya studied the schematics. Armed guards, biometric security, probably reinforced after we escaped. They'll be expecting retaliation, which is why we go during day. Marcus looked at Morrison. You and Maya infiltrated as CDC inspectors following up on the blood donation program. I provide extraction if you are compromised. You'll be vulnerable in daylight. I've operated in daylight before. Hurts like hell, limits my abilities, but it's possible for short periods. Maya's hands shook slightly as she processed what they were proposing. Breaking into a federal contractor's research facility to steal evidence of genocide while wanted fugitives hunted by the entire law enforcement apparatus of the Pacific Northwest. Her analyst mind was probably calculating the odds, coming up with numbers that didn't inspire confidence. If we're caught, Shaw will kill us. If we don't try, Shaw will kill everyone. Marcus met her eyes. You didn't steal those documents and run for your life because you wanted to play it safe. You did it because someone needed to stop what's happening. Nothing's changed except now you've got help. Morrison checked his watch. We've got 8 hours until facility day shift. Enough time to prep gear, forge credentials, and get 3 hours sleep. They worked through the planning with military efficiency. Morrison had contacts who could produce fake CDC badges that would pass most security screenings. Maya knew the facility layout from interagency cooperation, could navigate it like someone with legitimate clearance. Marcus would position himself in the parking garage, weakened by sun, but still capable of providing violent extraction if everything went sideways. By 10 in the morning, they were ready. Morrison drove a nondescript sedan that screamed government fleet vehicle. Maya wore a pantsuit that screamed federal bureaucrat. Marcus crouched in the SUV's cargo area, UV blocking film on the windows, providing minimal protection from daylight that felt like fire ants crawling under his skin. The Vanguard facility occupied a converted tech campus in Redmond, all glass and steel and cultivated landscaping. Normal. Professional. the kind of place that developed medical breakthroughs and filed quarterly earnings reports. Nothing in the exterior suggested they were weaponizing genocide in the sub-basements. Morrison and Maya approached the main entrance with the bored confidence of bureaucrats on routine inspection. Marcus watched through tinted windows as they presented credentials, spoke to the security desk, got visitor badges and an escort. Everything proceeding exactly as planned, which made every combat instinct Marcus possessed scream warnings. The next hour stretched like taffy. Marcus sat in the SUV's artificial twilight, feeling his skin blister where sunlight leaked through imperfect UV protection, monitoring the facility's exterior for signs of compromise. Delivery trucks came and went. Employees took smoke breaks. The world continued its mundane rotation while three people tried to prevent atrocity in the building's depths. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio earpiece. "We're in. Dr. Sarah Vance is giving us the tour. Everything looks legitimate so far. Stay alert. Shaw's smart enough to keep the ugly stuff hidden." "Copy that." Marcus waited. Waiting was hardest part of any operation. The silence where imagination filled gaps with worst-case scenarios where every passing minute felt like failure accumulating. His phone buzzed. Adrian's number. Marcus ignored it. The second call came from Victoria. Also ignored. The third call was unknown number, but something made him answer. Damian Thornwood's theatrical voice oozed through the speaker. "Marcus, I heard you escaped Shaw's hospitality. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. You can't stop what's coming." "I can try. Even if you expose Shaw's weapon, even if you prove I've been funding him, you'll still face me in challenge. 72 hours from your sanctuary invocation. I'll kill you in front of the entire court, take control of Adrian's territory, and finish what Shaw started. You're betting on Shaw's weapon to weaken me first. I'm betting on inevitability. You're old Marcus. Tired. You've been dying for 3 centuries, just too stubborn to lie down. This is your chance to die for something meaningful, instead of fading away in some penthouse forgotten and irrelevant." The call ended. Marcus sat in silence, Damian's words echoing. The vampire was right about some things. Marcus was tired. Had been for decades, maybe centuries. But tired didn't mean ready to quit. Tired meant understanding the cost and choosing to pay it anyway. Morrison's voice crackled urgent. "We've got a problem. Found a level 4 lab Vance wasn't supposed to show us. Shaw's keeping test subjects. Humans showing failed vampire transformation symptoms. This is human experimentation, not vaccine research. Document everything. Get out clean if possible. She's cooperating. Says Shaw has her daughter using her as leverage. If Maya can promise witness protection." "Promised. Now extract." "Copy. Moving to wait. Security's mobilizing. Someone flagged us." Through the windshield, Marcus saw the facility's main entrance erupt with activity. Guards in tactical gear weapons raised lockdown procedures engaging. Morrison and Maya's cover was blown. They had maybe 90 seconds before Shaw's people had them contained. Marcus kicked open the SUV's rear door, despite daylight that hit like napalm. His skin started blistering immediately, vampire flesh reacting to solar radiation, the way water reacted to sodium. He moved through the pain, decades of discipline, overriding biology's protests, sprinting toward the facility's garage entrance, with speed that blurred human perception. The garage security recognized threat too late. Marcus was through the door before they could raise weapons, moving with the terrible efficiency of a predator, finally allowed to stop pretending. 3 guards went down without firing a shot, disarmed and unconscious, before higher brain functions registered danger. Marcus grabbed the last guard's radio, listened to the chatter. "Intruders on sub-level 3, 2 suspects armed and dangerous, implementing containment protocols." Sub-level 3. Marcus oriented himself using the facility's posted emergency evacuation maps, found the stairwell, descended 3 floors, while his skin continued cooking in residual sunlight from the garage entrance. By the time he reached the corridor where Morrison's signal originated, he looked like a burn victim, raw meat showing through split skin. 8 guards blocked the corridor. Morrison and Maya backed against the far wall. Hands raised surrounded. Morrison's eyes went wide, seeing Marcus emerge from the stairwell, looking like something out of a horror film. The guards turned, saw the vampire, and credit to their training, they didn't hesitate. Wooden rounds filled the corridor with splintering thunder. Marcus took 3 hits before he could react. Wooden bullets hurt worse than lead splinters spreading through tissue like infection. But wood wouldn't stop a vampire unless it hit the heart or spine, and these guards were trained for center mass, not supernatural vitals. Marcus moved through the fusillade like smoke too fast for human eyes to track, disarming the first guard and using him as a shield while closing the distance. The fight lasted 10 seconds. Morrison pulled Maya into cover while Marcus dismantled 8 trained operators with the clinical precision of someone who'd been killing professionally for 3 centuries. No wasted movement, no theatrical flourishes, just efficient violence that left unconscious bodies scattered like broken toys. Morrison dragged Maya toward the emergency exit. Marcus followed Burns, healing slowly wooden splinters, working their way out through regenerating tissue. They emerged into daylight that felt like Sid sprinting for the SUV, while alarms shrieked and more guards poured from the building. Morrison drove like he'd learned in combat zones, weaving through traffic with calculated recklessness, putting distance between them and the facility. Maya sat in the back seat next to Marcus, staring at him with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose worldview had just expanded violently. "You look like you were on fire." "I was. Vampire flesh burns in direct sunlight. Usually not an issue since we avoid going outside during the day. But you did it anyway. You needed extraction. That was the plan." Her hands shook as she opened a document folder she'd somehow maintained grip on through the entire escape. "We got evidence. Photos of the test subjects, Vance's testimony on video, financial records, linking Shaw to illegal human experimentation. It's enough to bring federal charges. It's enough to prove Shaw's not doing legitimate research." Morrison took a corner fast enough to make the SUV's tires scream. "But it won't stop deployment. He's too close. Tomorrow night he'll have the weapon ready. After that, it doesn't matter what courts say." They drove in silence, Marcus's burns healing visibly, flesh knitting back together in ways that would have seemed miraculous if they weren't fleeing for their lives from genocide. The safe house welcomed them back with the sterile comfort of a tomb, secure and isolated, and ultimately just another place to wait for death to arrive. Maya spread the evidence across every available surface, building the case like a prosecutor assembling trial exhibits. Photographs of humans in containment cells, their bodies showing signs of incomplete vampire transformation. Medical records documenting Shaw's experiments, trying to force-turn old blood carriers, testing whether their antibodies could be overwhelmed by concentrated vampire virus. Financial statements proving Thornwood Enterprises had funded Vanguard for 20 years, specifically for vampire weapon development. Morrison pulled up surveillance from outside Nocturne enhancement software, improving the earlier footage of Victoria. The audio resolved into clarity that removed all ambiguity. "I need to report to the elders. Kane has the Chen woman. Shaw's timetable is accelerating. If Adrian doesn't revoke sanctuary in the next 12 hours, we'll have open war between vampire factions." The voice on the other end of the call was indistinct, but Victoria's response told the story. "I understand. I'll push for emergency council meeting. Kane can't be allowed to drag us into conflict with federal authorities." Maya looked at Marcus with something like pity. "She's not your ally." "No, she's playing the long game, positioning herself to take power when Adrian falls." The phone rang again. Adrian this time, and Marcus finally answered. The king's voice carried the weight of someone who'd aged years and hours. "Victoria's calling emergency council meeting. She's got 7 votes lined up to revoke your sanctuary and hand Chen over to Vanguard. I can't stop it without splitting the court completely. Don't try. Let the meeting happen." "Marcus, what are you?" "We have evidence. Proof Shaw's conducting illegal human experimentation. Proof Damien's been funding him for decades. Proof the Vanguard partnership is cover for genocide. We presented at the council meeting, force a public reckoning. And if that doesn't work, if they vote to revoke anyway, then we find out who's worth saving and who's complicit." The line went dead. Marcus looked at Morrison and Maya at the evidence they'd risked everything to gather at the conspiracy that would sound insane to anyone who hadn't lived long enough to see how institutions failed when confronted with existential threats. Emergency council meeting in 4 hours, time to get cleaned up and prepare testimony. Maya's legal training kicked in, organizing evidence into coherent narrative, building the case like she was facing a jury. Morrison cleaned weapons with the methodical focus of someone preparing for the possibility that words wouldn't be enough. Marcus showered, washing away blood and ash and the lingering smell of burnt flesh, watching pink-tinged water spiral down the drain. The mirror showed someone who looked 60 but felt 600 scars visible, where blessed silver and wooden bullets had left permanent marks. Gettysburg Quezon Fallujah. Every war carved into his flesh, a map of violence spanning generations. Nathaniel's face looked back at him from memory younger brother who died defending people he had no obligation to protect. Because they stopped being enemies when they needed help. They became people. Marcus dressed in the same suit he'd worn to the first council meeting, armor made of Italian silk. Morrison drove them back to Nocturne through afternoon traffic. Three fugitives heading toward trial that would determine not just their fates, but whether vampires would accept genocide to avoid conflict. The council chamber was packed when they arrived. Not just the usual 40 representatives, but observers from every clan on the West Coast, every faction with interest in Seattle's politics. Word had spread about Marcus's escape, about evidence of Shaw's weapon, about the conspiracy that went deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Adrian stood at the head of the chamber with the exhausted posture of a leader watching his kingdom fracture. Victoria held position to his left, neutral ground prosecutor, preparing to make her case. Damien lounged against the right wall with barely contained satisfaction, victory already visible in his theatrical smile. Marcus walked straight to the center with Maya beside him and Morrison standing guard. The assembled vampires watched with predatory stillness, waiting to see whether the old soldier's gambit would work or whether they were witnessing his public execution. Victoria spoke first, laying out the case for revocation with prosecutorial precision. Marcus Kane granted sanctuary to a human fugitive without authorization. His actions have endangered this court, compromised our treaty with Vanguard Dynamics, and drawn federal investigation to our territory. The law is clear. Sanctuary granted improperly must be revoked. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Maya's fingers dug into the evidence folder. She carried knuckles white with pressure. Morrison's hand rested near his concealed weapon, professional soldier calculating angles if everything went violent. Then Marcus produced the photographs, projected them onto the chamber's stone walls. Humans in containment cells, bodies twisted by failed vampire transformations. Medical records documenting experiments. Financial statements proving Thornwood funding. Dr. Vance's video testimony explaining how Shaw had used her daughter as leverage, how Project Daybreak wasn't cure research, but genocide development. The chamber exploded in chaos. Vampires surging forward to see the evidence, voices overlapping in anger and disbelief and fear. Adrian's attempt to call order failed twice before silence grudgingly returned. Damien pushed off the wall with liquid grace, moving center stage like an actor hitting his mark. Fabricated evidence from a desperate fugitive and a human whose loyalty can be bought. This proves nothing except that Kane will resort to any deception to avoid consequences. The evidence is real, verified by CDC databases, cross-referenced with federal archives. Maya's voice shook but held. I'm Dr. Maya Chen's CDC Intelligence Division. I didn't steal these documents on a whim. I stole them because they document crimes against humanity that no law enforcement agency was willing to investigate. Victoria's prosecutor instincts kicked in, cross-examining like Maya was hostile witness. Convenient timing. You produced this evidence exactly when Kane faces revocation. How do we know you didn't manufacture it to support his conspiracy theory? Because 39 humans are dead. Maya pulled out the final document, the recruitment list with its red X's marking each eliminated old blood carrier. These people volunteered for Vanguard's donor program. Within 6 months, all of them died of natural causes or accidents. But their deaths freed Shaw to extract their blood, analyze their antibodies, synthesize the compounds he needed for his weapon. She looked around the chamber, meeting vampire eyes with the desperate courage of someone who knew she was probably about to die, but needed them to understand first. You think this is about partnership, about medical research, about humans and vampires working together. But Shaw's definition of working together means eliminating you. And Damien's been helping him for 20 years because he thinks genocide serves survival. Damien's smile never wavered. Even if Shaw has developed a weapon, why would that concern us? Weapons exist. Threats exist. The strong adapt and survive. The weak perish. That's nature. Marcus felt the room's shifting sentiment fracturing along predictable lines. Young vampires drawn to Damien's social Darwinism. Old vampires remembering too many massacres to trust easy answers. Adrian trying desperately to hold together a court splitting down the middle. Then Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at it, face going pale, answered without apology. When how many long pause? I understand, I'm on my way. She looked at Adrian, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine fear in the prosecutor's eyes. Shaw just raided my estate. 12 of my people dead staked during evening hours while they rested. He's taken me hostage to force this court's cooperation. The words hung in sudden silence. Not metaphorical hostage, but literal kidnapping, direct action, violating every treaty and pretense of civilization. Shaw had escalated from subtle conspiracy to open warfare, and the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Marcus looked at Damien, saw satisfaction barely concealed behind theatrical concern. This was the play. Force the council to choose between protecting Victoria or maintaining principles. Either they bent to Shaw's demands or they lost one of their most powerful members. Adrian's voice came out strangled. Where is she? Victoria stared at her phone screen. Unknown location, but Shaw sent a video. She projected it onto the chamber walls. The footage showed Victoria Ashford bound to a chair in a warehouse surrounded by armed men. Shaw's voice came through tinny speakers. King Cross, I believe I have something of yours. Here's the deal. You give me Maya Chen and Marcus Kane. I return Victoria alive. You have 2 hours to decide. The video ended. The council erupted in overlapping fury and calculation. Marcus watched Adrian's face cycle through emotions too complex for names, landing finally on the expression of someone realizing he'd walked into a trap years in the making and only now saw the teeth. Morrison leaned close to Marcus's ear. It's a trap. Shaw wants you both in one location. I know. Then why are you smiling? Marcus wasn't aware he had been. But maybe there was something darkly satisfying about enemies finally dropping pretense about conflicts that had been building for decades, reaching their inevitable violent resolution. He'd been waiting for this fight since Khe-san. Time to stop running from it. Because traps work both ways. The warehouse sat in Seattle's forgotten industrial zone where shipping containers rusted into sculpture and rats owned the night. Shaw had chosen his killing ground with tactical precision, isolated location, multiple sight lines, high ground for snipers. Morrison's drone footage showed 15 armed contractors in tactical positions, Victoria bound center stage, and Shaw himself waiting with the patience of a man who'd spent 55 years preparing for this exact moment. Maya spread the surveillance images across the safe house table analyst's mind, dissecting the tactical problem. It's a kill box. The moment you walk through that door, Shaw's people have overlapping fields of fire. You won't survive 10 seconds. That's assuming I use the door. Marcus traced alternative entry points on the building schematic. Roof access, drainage system, loading dock. Shaw's planned for frontal assault, but he's human. Humans think in 2 dimensions. Morrison checked his weapons with the methodical focus of a man who'd accepted he was probably about to die, but intended to make it expensive. I've got 4 guys willing to provide distraction. Former operators, good men owe me favors. They can draw fire while you infiltrate. Reaper, this isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. Shaw crossed the line from contractor work to war crimes. I don't care how good the pay is. Adrian called again. Marcus answered this time, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear the king's desperation. Council voted 8-7. Sanctuary is revoked. You're ordered to turn yourself and Chen over to Shaw within the hour. And you're enforcing this. Silence stretched long enough to be answer. Adrian's voice came back quieter, carrying weight that bent it toward breaking. I can't hold the court together if I openly defy a vote. But Marcus, I'm not sending anyone to arrest you. If you want to disappear, I'll give you 24 hours head start before reporting you've gone rogue. Running isn't the play. Then what is? I'm going to walk into Shaw's trap, kill everyone who gets between me and Victoria, and make sure the colonel understands that some debts take lifetimes to pay. That's suicide. That's the job. Marcus ended the call before Adrian could argue further. Maya stared at him with the expression of someone watching a man choose death over retreat and not understanding why. You don't have to do this. Morrison can get you out of Seattle, new identity disappear completely. Let someone else fight this battle. There is no one else. Shaw's weapon deploys tomorrow night. After that, every vampire on Earth becomes vulnerable. Adrian's too political to act decisively. Damien's actively working with Shaw. Victoria's captured. I'm all that's left. One vampire against Shaw's entire operation. I've faced worse odds. He didn't elaborate on when, didn't mention that every example his mind supplied ended in failure in bodies. Sometimes the only choice was between dying on your feet or living on your knees, and Marcus had spent 3 centuries learning which one he could survive. Morrison's team assembled in the pre-midnight darkness, 4 men with special forces backgrounds and the particular fatalism that came from volunteering for missions with low survival probability. They looked at Marcus like he was a weapon. They'd been issued something dangerous that might explode in their hands, but was necessary for the objective. The approach took 3 vehicles. Morrison's distraction team would hit the warehouse's east entrance exactly at midnight, drawing Shaw's focus while Marcus infiltrated through the drainage system. Maya stayed at the safe house with instructions to contact CDC and FBI with the evidence if Marcus didn't make contact within 2 hours. She'd argued for coming along legal training, making her believe documentation mattered more than violence. Marcus had shut that down with the flat authority of someone who'd been in enough firefights to know documentation happened after you survived, not during. The drainage tunnel smelled like decades of chemical runoff and things that had crawled down there to die. Marcus moved through darkness that his vampire vision rendered clear as day, following underground passages toward the warehouse's substructure. Water dripped with irregular rhythm, each drop marking time toward midnight, when Morrison's team would engage and everything would go loud. Shaw's voice echoed in Marcus's memory. Nothing kills you, does it? Wrong. Plenty killed vampires if applied with sufficient enthusiasm. Wooden stakes through vital organs, decapitation, fire, prolonged exposure to sunlight. The blessed silver scar across Marcus's ribs proved even wounds that didn't kill could mark you forever. But Shaw had spent 5 decades obsessing over the thing that got away, and obsession created blind spots. The colonel expected Marcus to be desperate, reckless, driven by emotion to make tactical mistakes. Shaw didn't understand that 340 years taught you how to weaponize desperation, how to make the enemy's certainty into his vulnerability. Midnight arrived with the sound of flashbangs and automatic weapons fire. Morrison's team hit the east entrance exactly on schedule, creating enough chaos to justify Shaw's entire security force repositioning. Marcus emerged from a floor grate near the warehouse's west wall, moving through shadows while contractors ran toward the gunfire like moths toward flame. Victoria remained where Shaw had positioned her, center of the main floor, bound to a chair, blood crusting her face from what looked like enthusiastic interrogation. She saw Marcus emerge from the darkness and her eyes went wide, then narrowed in calculation. The prosecutor's mind already working angles, evaluating whether rescue was possible or if she needed to start planning for whatever came after both rescuers died trying. Shaw stood 20 feet from Victoria on a raised platform that had once been a supervisor's station. He'd changed from his earlier suit into tactical gear, the colonel returning to his roots as a soldier who killed because that's what soldiers did. 50 contractors surrounded the building's interior in defensive positions, weapons trained on every approach. But they were all looking toward the east entrance where Morrison's firefight raged. Shaw had positioned himself to observe, not fight. Classic officer behavior, maintaining command position while subordinates engaged the threat. Marcus crossed half the warehouse floor before Shaw noticed movement in his peripheral vision. The colonel's head snapped around, saw the vampire materializing from darkness, like smoke, given predatory form, and something that might have been satisfaction crossed his weathered face. Kane, right on schedule. I was beginning to worry Morrison's distraction wouldn't draw you out. Every weapon in the building pivoted toward Marcus. Laser sights painted his chest with enough red dots to approximate arterial spray. But Shaw raised his hand holding fire, savoring the moment he'd been building toward for half a century. All those years in Vietnam, I thought I was crazy, seeing things the government said couldn't exist. They destroyed my career, my reputation, my sanity. Shaw descended from the platform with measured steps, moving like a man approaching a museum exhibit he'd paid admission to view. But I wasn't crazy. You were real. And now here we are, monster and hunter, exactly where we always should have been. I'm not here to fight you, Vincent. I'm here for Victoria. Of course you are. The noble warrior saving his comrades, dying for principles that stopped mattering centuries ago. Shaw's smile carried the particular cruelty of someone about to reveal he'd won completely. Do you know what I learned in 55 years of hunting your kind? You're not special. Not chosen, not cursed. You're infected. A virus rewrote your DNA, and you've been confusing disease with destiny ever since. You've said this already. Get to the point. The point is, I've cured you. Shaw produced a canister from his tactical vest, held it up like a priest displaying the host. The container was small enough to palm, unremarkable, except for the biohazard symbol and alphanumeric designation PD7. Project Daybreak Formula 7, airborne compound that targets the viral components of vampirism. 30-second exposure time, 4-minute mortality rate for infected individuals, and completely harmless to normal humans. He opened the canister. White gas began hissing out with the sound of air escaping pressurized containers. Marcus felt it hit his respiratory system immediately, foreign chemistry interacting with whatever the vampire virus had made of his lungs. The sensation was wrong in ways that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with suddenly remembering what it felt like to be fragile. The old blood was the key. Maya Chen's antibodies mixed with your viral markers created the perfect neutralization agent. I would thank her, but you probably killed her already to prevent me from getting her blood. Noble but ultimately pointless. Victoria coughed, blood speckling her lips. The gas had spread to her position, and her healing factor stuttered like an engine misfiring. The wounds Shaw's interrogation had left didn't close, didn't even slow their bleeding. Shaw, stop this. Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended, his throat already raw from the compound's effects. You're right about everything. Vampires are infected, not evolved. We're predators, not protectors, but Victoria's a person. You don't need to kill her to prove your point. I don't need to, but I want to. Shaw's smile widened, revealing a madness that 55 years of obsession had cultivated. I want you to watch someone die knowing there's nothing your supernatural powers can do to stop it. I want you to feel helpless, the way I felt helpless when the government destroyed my career for telling the truth. Victoria's breathing came harsh and wet, lungs filling with a fluid her body could no longer expel. The prosecutor, who'd spent decades manipulating vampire politics, who'd positioned herself to seize power when Adrian fell, who'd played every side against the middle for her own advantage, she was drowning in her own blood because Shaw wanted vengeance against a system that had invalidated his trauma. Marcus moved before conscious thought engaged. Shaw's contractors opened fire, but Project Daybreak had stripped away the supernatural speed that made vampires unkillable. Marcus took 3 rounds, crossing the distance to Shaw, pain lighting up nerve pathways that remembered what bullets felt like before the virus made him invulnerable. He reached Shaw anyway, driven by 3 centuries of refusing to die when death would be convenient. His hand closed around the colonel's throat, lifting him off the ground, despite bullet wounds that leaked red instead of healing. Let her go! Shaw laughed even while being strangled. Too late. The compound's already in her bloodstream. She's got maybe 90 seconds. And you, his eyes tracked to Marcus's wounds, to blood that continued flowing instead of clotting. You're human now, mortal. Kill me, and my contractors kill you. And then what stops Project Daybreak from deploying globally tomorrow night? What stops every vampire on Earth from becoming as vulnerable as you are right now? Marcus felt the truth of it settle into his chest, where bullets had torn holes in 340-year-old flesh. Shaw had won. The weapon worked. Marcus was dying, Victoria was dying, and the tactical situation offered no victory condition except taking the colonel with him into whatever waited beyond mortality. Then Morrison's voice crackled through the radio earpiece Marcus still wore. Kane abort. Shaw's weapon has collateral damage. What? CDC database cross-reference. Project Daybreak targets regenerative cells indiscriminately. That includes human stem cells, bone marrow, immune systems. If Shaw deploys this in a populated area, he'll kill cancer patients, transplant recipients, anyone with certain genetic markers. Shaw's face went rigid against Marcus's grip. Morrison's voice continued with the particular horror of someone reading casualty projections in real time. Projected collateral in Seattle alone, 23% of the human population. Approximately 400,000 people dead within a week of exposure. You're lying. Shaw's voice came out choked by Marcus's hand and something else, something that sounded like the world crumbling beneath certainty. That's, we tested, on isolated samples. The formula only affects vampire viral markers. In laboratory conditions, not real-world populations. A new voice joined the radio channel. Dr. Sarah Vance, the Vanguard scientist Shaw, had coerced into cooperation. Colonel, I tried to tell you. The final testing protocol showed complications, but you wouldn't listen. You were so focused on killing vampires that you didn't care about human casualties. That's not my grandson. Shaw's voice broke completely. Daniel has leukemia. He's undergoing bone marrow treatment. Are you saying your grandson has the genetic markers that make him vulnerable to Project Daybreak? If you deploy this weapon, Daniel dies within 72 hours of exposure. Marcus felt Shaw's body go slack, the fight draining out of him as the arithmetic of genocide became personal. The colonel had spent 55 years building a weapon to eliminate the monsters he believed had destroyed his life, and that weapon would kill the one thing he had left to live for. No, the word came out, small, broken. That's not, it was supposed to be clean. Surgical, just the vampires. There's no such thing as surgical genocide. Marcus released Shaw, let him collapse to the warehouse floor. That's what I've been trying to tell you. The moment you start choosing who deserves to live based on what they are instead of who they are, you become the monster you're hunting. Shaw curled into himself, 62 years of trauma and obsession, cracking open to reveal the terrified lieutenant who'd seen something impossible in a jungle and spent the rest of his life trying to prove he wasn't crazy. Marcus looked at him and saw not an enemy, but a casualty, another victim of the violence that spiraled outward from every war into the lives of everyone it touched. Victoria's breathing had stopped. The gas had done its work. Marcus knelt beside her, feeling his own wounds continue bleeding in ways they hadn't for 3 centuries. The prosecutor's eyes stared at nothing, whatever final calculations she'd been running, interrupted by cellular shutdown. She'd played the long game, positioned herself for power, and died because a traumatized veteran needed someone to punish for crimes they'd never committed. Morrison burst through the east entrance, his distraction team securing the contractors who'd suddenly lost their command structure. He took in the scene, Victoria dead, Shaw broken, Marcus bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds that weren't healing, and his operator's mind processed it with professional efficiency. We need to move. CDC and FBI are en route. Vance tipped them to Shaw's illegal human experimentation. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is swarming with federal agents who will have questions you can't answer. Shaw stays. He'll face human justice for the people he's killed. That's more mercy than he deserves. Marcus stood, legs unsteady in ways he hadn't experienced since Gettysburg. Being mortal again felt like wearing clothes 3 sizes too small, every movement constrained by vulnerability he'd forgotten existed. Shaw remained on the floor, broken by the realization that his weapon for protecting humanity would kill the only human he loved. Destroy the compound. All of it. Every sample, every formula, every record. Shaw looked up, face wet with tears. If I do that, I have nothing. Vanguard collapses, the board fires me. I lose everything I've built. You'll have Daniel, alive, healthy, with a grandfather who chose his humanity over his hatred. That's more than most people get. Something shifted in Shaw's expression, the zealot cracking to reveal the soldier underneath. The man who'd taken an oath to protect people who'd spent 5 decades convinced that oath required genocide, suddenly confronted with the truth that protection sometimes meant surrendering the weapons you'd built. All samples. All of them. Shaw pulled a radio from his vest, keyed it with shaking hands. All Vanguard personnel, this is Colonel Shaw. Implement Protocol 0. Destroy all Project Daybreak materials. All samples, all data, all research. Authorization code Delta Whiskey 77. A voice crackled back. Sir, that's everything. Years of work. I know what it is. Do it anyway. That's an order. The radio went silent. Marcus heard sirens approaching law enforcement responding to reports of gunfire in an abandoned industrial zone. Time to disappear before federal agents arrived and started asking questions about the corpse that didn't die from bullet wounds, because those wounds had already stopped bleeding. Project Daybreak's effects were temporary. Marcus felt the vampire virus already fighting back regeneration, stuttering into life wounds beginning their slow close. But the hour he'd spent mortal had been enough. Enough to remember what vulnerability felt like. Enough to understand what he was asking humans to accept when he demanded they coexist with predators who couldn't be killed. Morrison's team evacuated through the drainage tunnels, leaving Shaw to face the consequences of his actions. The colonel would survive, would probably even avoid prison given his connections and willingness to cooperate with authorities. But he'd lost his weapon, his purpose, the thing that had sustained him through 55 years of obsessive hunting. That was punishment enough. Maya waited at the safe house laptop, surrounded by evidence she'd been preparing for simultaneous release to every major news outlet. She looked up as Marcus entered, relief and horror warring in her expression. "You're bleeding." Was bleeding. "It's healing now. Shaw's weapon works, but the effects are temporary." Morrison called, said Victoria's dead. "Yes. I'm sorry." "Don't be." She was playing her own game, manipulating everyone for political advantage. She died how she lived, as a casualty of vampire politics. The words came out harsher than intended. Marcus felt exhaustion settling into bones that remembered too many fights, too many losses, too many times standing over bodies while wondering if any of it mattered. 340 years of violence, and what did he have to show for it? A safe house full of weapons, a conspiracy exposed in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new enemies wearing familiar faces. Adrian called as dawn approached. The king's voice carried defeat that transcended politics. Shaw's weapon is destroyed. Vanguard Dynamics is under federal investigation. Damien's fled the country, probably Europe. The council there isn't a council anymore. Half of them followed Damien, the other half are scattered. What about you? I'm king of an empire that just collapsed. Victoria's dead, my most powerful rival is in exile, and I've got no authority to rebuild what broke. Then don't rebuild. Build something new. Like what? I don't know, but the old ways just killed Victoria and nearly killed all of us. Maybe it's time to try something that doesn't end with bodies piled in warehouses. The call ended without resolution. Marcus looked at Maya, at the evidence she'd compiled, at the proof of conspiracy that would matter to human authorities but meant nothing to vampires who'd spent centuries playing the same power games with different pieces. What happens to me now? Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been running for days and just realized the finish line didn't exist. Shaw's gone, Damien's exiled, but I'm still old blood, still carrying antibodies that could be weaponized. Someone will come for me eventually. Then we make sure they can't find you. Morrison entered carrying documents Marcus recognized: new identity papers, credit cards, passport. The kind of thing that costs favors and money in equal measure. Sarah Reeves, age 28, intelligence analyst for a private security consulting firm. Complete legend backstopped through multiple databases. You'll need to leave Seattle, probably West Coast entirely. Maya took the documents with hands that shook slightly. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, but Kane saved my life in Fallujah, and you saved his life by stealing those documents. Figure that makes us even. She looked at Marcus' legal mind, struggling with a world that operated on debts and honor instead of laws and precedent. What about you? I've got a challenge to face. Damien invoked trial by combat 72 hours ago. Even in exile, he can enforce that claim if he wants to maintain any legitimacy with vampire factions. That's insane. You nearly died from Shaw's weapon. You need time to recover. Vampires don't get recovery time. We get what we can take, and we hold it until someone takes it from us. The challenge was scheduled for midnight, third day after sanctuary invocation. Marcus spent the intervening hours training his body back to combat readiness, forcing regeneration through sheer stubborn refusal to accept weakness. The bullet wounds closed. The burns from Shaw's weapon faded. The 340-year-old killing machine reassembled itself piece by piece. Maya left on an afternoon flight to Atlanta using her new identity, carrying evidence that would be released if anything happened to her. Morrison provided the escort 4 operators who'd proven their loyalty by choosing principles over paychecks. She hugged Marcus before leaving civilian awkwardness mixing with genuine gratitude. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. Survive the next decade, build a life that matters, then maybe thank me. Will I see you again? Probably not. My world and yours don't intersect safely. She left. Marcus watched her go and felt something ease in his chest that he didn't examine too closely. Nathaniel would have approved, would have called it doing right for its own sake, protecting people, because that's what soldiers did when they remembered their humanity. The Covenant Hall filled with witnesses for the challenge. Not the usual 40 representatives, but hundreds of vampires traveling from across the country to watch Marcus Kane and Damian Thornwood resolve questions that went deeper than sanctuary law. This was about philosophy, about whether vampires should hide or dominate, cooperate or conquer, evolve or extinction. Damian arrived with theatrical precision, blonde hair, perfect three-piece suit, immaculate, surrounded by followers who'd chosen his vision of vampire supremacy over Adrian's compromises. He looked at Marcus with satisfaction, barely concealed behind professional courtesy. You've looked better. Shaw's hospitality didn't agree with you. I've had worse. Kaysan was particularly unpleasant. Always the soldier, always the warrior. But warriors die, Marcus. They fight until something finally kills them. I'm offering you that release. Alaric Stone presided as neutral arbiter, ancient vampire who'd helped write the Covenant. His voice carried weight that transcended politics, the authority of someone who'd survived by being smarter than the violence around him. Combat until submission or death. Victor claims territory and precedent. Loser's sanctuary claims are voided. Traditional terms. The arena cleared. Marcus and Damian circled each other with the wariness of predators evaluating threat levels. Damian was older, faster, stronger. He'd been turned in 1640, had fought in wars. Marcus hadn't been born to see carried experience that numbered in centuries. But Marcus had spent 340 years learning that experience mattered less than willingness to pay the price victory required. Damian attacked with supernatural speed, closing the distance before human eyes could track. Marcus met him with defensive techniques learned from samurai masters in feudal Japan, redirecting force rather than opposing it. They exchanged blows that would have killed humans, testing responses, mapping capabilities. The fight escalated. Damian wielded shadows like weapons, vampire abilities honed through centuries of practice. Marcus countered with raw combat expertise, techniques accumulated from every war since Gettysburg, synthesized into killing art. Blood painted the arena floor theirs and the memories it carried. You're slowing down. Damian's voice came between exchanges, theatrical, even mid-combat. Shaw's weapon affected you more than you're admitting. Your healing is compromised. Marcus didn't waste breath responding. Damian was right. The temporary mortality had left traces, wounds that closed slower than normal regeneration, that stuttered. But pain was an old companion. Marcus had learned to fight through worse. Damian pressed his advantage, driving Marcus toward the arena's edge. The assembled vampires watched with predatory stillness, waiting to see which vision would triumph. Survival through hiding or survival through dominance. Cooperation or conquest. Humanity or monstrosity. Then Marcus stopped retreating. Damian's next attack met not defense but counteroffensive, Marcus accepting damage to deliver worse. They crashed together with impact that cracked stone floor. Two apex predators locked in death embrace. Damian had speed, Marcus had desperation. Damian had strength. Marcus had nothing left to lose. The mathematics shifted, calculation replacing choreography. This wasn't demonstration combat. This was survival. Marcus got his hand around Damian's throat, squeezed with grip that could crush steel. The blonde vampire's eyes went wide, then narrowed with calculation. His knee drove into Marcus's ribs where blessed silver scar tissue had never properly healed. Pain white hot and absolute, the one wound that remained mortal vulnerability. Marcus held on. Damian struck again, targeting the scar with precision that spoke to intelligence, gathered weaknesses documented. Each impact felt like Gettysburg happening in miniature Confederate bayonet, carving him apart, while Nathaniel died defending strangers. Submit! Damian's voice came strained through Marcus's grip but confident of victory. I'll make your death quick. More mercy than you deserve. Instead of answering, Marcus used his free hand to drive fingers into Damien's eyes, the kind of dirty fighting that would have gotten him court-martialed in any regular army. Damien screamed, his grip loosening enough for Marcus to pivot, throw-drive his opponent's head into stone flooring with force that created spiderweb cracks. Adrian's voice cut through the violence with authority that made both fighters freeze. "I invoke King's mercy." The arena went silent. King's mercy was rarely invoked ancient provision, allowing a monarch to stop combat between valuable subordinates before both were lost. But using it risked appearing weak, indecisive, unwilling to let disputes resolve naturally. Adrian descended from his position, moving to stand between the combatants with the careful posture of someone expecting violence from both sides. Marcus Kane has proven his point. Sanctuary stands on principle, not convenience. Challenge is satisfied. Damien struggled to his feet, face bloodied, one eye already swelling shut. "You're violating procedure. The challenge can be stopped by King's authority. You want to challenge that, go ahead. But you'll lose." The blonde vampire looked around the hall, counting allies and finding fewer than expected. Shaw's defeat had undermined Damien's argument that human cooperation was weakness. Victoria's death had proven that political manipulation could be fatal. The vampire supremacist vision suddenly looked less like strength and more like suicide. "I invoke exile." Alaric Stone's voice held judicial finality. Damien Thornwood conspired with humans to develop vampire genocide weapon, funded illegal research, enabled human experimentation. "You're stripped of territory and exiled from North America for 1 century. Damien's theatrical mask cracked, revealing fury and calculation in equal measure. "This isn't over." "It is for tonight." Adrian's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who just prevented civil war by sacrificing protocol. "You have 48 hours to leave the continent." The hall emptied slowly, vampires dispersing with the stunned silence of population that had just watched its political landscape completely reconfigure. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, bleeding from wounds that were healing, but slower than they should, feeling every one of his 340 years. Adrian approached after the others left, just two vampires who'd known each other for 8 decades, standing in wreckage of empire. "You were right, about Shaw, about Damien, about the partnership. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. Apologies don't bring back Victoria. No, but they're all I have." Marcus looked at the king, saw someone struggling to rebuild from collapse. Adrian meant well, would probably even succeed at creating something better from the ruins. But Marcus was tired of watching systems fail, tired of serving kings who made compromises that cost other people's lives. "I'm leaving Seattle." "Where will you go?" Maya's bloodline was one of 7 old blood families. 6 are dead. Somewhere out there, survivors are running from whoever comes next. Someone needs to find them before the next Shaw does. "That's not your responsibility." "Maybe not, but I'm 340 years old and I'm tired of waiting for someone else to do the right thing." He left Adrian standing in the empty hall, walked out of nocturne into pre-dawn gray. Morrison waited by the motorcycle, having anticipated Marcus's decision with operator's instinct. "Need a wingman. You've got your own life." "Had my own life. Vanguard dissolved, my contract's void, and I'm unemployed. Figure protecting old blood families beats retirement." They drove through Seattle as the city woke, past commuters heading to jobs they tolerated, past homeless encampments, where people survived on society's margins, past all the small human struggles that continued regardless of vampire politics. The world turned indifferent to Marcus Kane's crisis of purpose. 6 months passed. Seattle rebuilt under Adrian's cautious leadership. Maya Chen started working for a private security firm under her new identity, occasionally sending encrypted updates that proved she was alive and thriving. Shaw cooperated with federal investigators, avoided prison through plea agreements, retired from Vanguard to spend time with his grandson. Damien vanished into European vampire networks, building support for whatever comeback he planned. And Marcus Kane tracked the remaining old blood families across 3 continents, protecting people who didn't know they needed protection from threats they didn't believe existed. Morrison proved invaluable, his operator skills complementing Marcus's vampire abilities, human and supernatural working together, because that's what survival required. Prague in December was all Gothic architecture and Christmas markets, and tourists who didn't notice the vampire sitting in a cafe reading about mysterious deaths in Old Town. The article described victims drained of blood bodies discovered in patterns that suggested ritual killing. Professional work, the kind that came from organization rather than random predation. Marcus folded the newspaper, signaled for his check. At the next table, a young woman sat alone, 19 or 20, checking her phone with nervous frequency. She had the particular tension of someone being hunted, and Marcus's senses caught traces of old blood markers in her scent. He approached without invitation, slid into the chair across from her. "You look like you're running from something." Her eyes went wide. "How did you? I've been doing this a long time. Tell me, has anyone been following you? Asking about your family history." She nodded, fear and relief warring in her expression. Someone who'd been alone with terror and suddenly found unexpected ally. "Then we need to talk. Quickly." They left the cafe together, vampire and old blood carrier united by circumstance. Across the street, a figure watched from shadows spoke into phone with clinical precision. "Target acquired. Old blood confirmed. Permission to engage." The voice on the other end came cold and efficient. "Negative. Follow and observe. The collectors want them alive." Marcus felt the surveillance but didn't react, walking with the practiced calm of someone who'd been bait before and knew how to weaponize the enemy's certainty. Let them watch. Let them think he was vulnerable. Let them believe that one old soldier and a scared girl were easy prey. 340 years had taught Marcus Kane that the best traps were the ones that looked like opportunities. Shaw had learned that lesson too late. These new hunters would learn it soon enough. The girl spoke as they walked, voice shaking. "My name is Sophie. My grandmother used to tell stories about our family, about how we were special. I thought she was just, I didn't know it was real. It's real, and that makes you valuable to people who shouldn't have you. Are you one of them?" "No." Marcus met her eyes, let her see the truth beneath 3 centuries of survival. "I'm the one who hides people from monsters. Even when those monsters look human. Even when they look like me." They disappeared into Prague's medieval streets, 2 pieces in a game that predated nations, predated modernity, predated the comfortable fiction that humans and vampires could coexist without cost. Somewhere behind them, the collectors deployed their hunters. Somewhere ahead, more old blood carriers ran from threats they couldn't name. And Marcus Kane, 340 years old, finally understood what Nathaniel had meant about people who stopped being enemies when they needed help. The war wasn't over, would probably never be over, but at least now he was fighting for something that made the dying matter. The night swallowed them whole.